Most travelers come to the Amalfi Coast for colorful villages, luxury hotels, and dramatic views of the Mediterranean. But beyond the famous postcards are hidden mountain towns, ancient footpaths, terraced farms, and parts of the coastline where life still moves at a slower pace. And most visitors never make it that far. The Amalfi Coast most people see is beautiful. But it's only the surface. What people think the Amalfi Coast is. When people think of the Amalfi Coast, they usually imagine colorful houses stacked above the sea, luxury hotels carved into cliffsides, expensive restaurants with Mediterranean views, and some of the most famous coastal scenery in Europe. And to be fair, that version absolutely exists. Because beyond the crowds lies another side of the coast, a quieter side, a deeper side. One where terraced hillsides replace hotel lobbies and ancient footpaths replace tour buses, and a different kind of beauty becomes visible only to those willing to look a little harder. And that's where the real surprises begin. Positano, the village everyone knows. For many travelers, the Amalfi Coast begins in Positano. The village seems to rise directly from the sea, as if someone stacked colorful buildings on top of one another and left them there to dry in the Mediterranean sun. Narrow staircases connect hidden alleyways where bougainvillea spills over whitewashed walls. Boutique shops line the paths leading down to the beach, and every turn reveals another view that seems almost too cinematic to be real. It's easy to understand why Positano became famous. It is, in many ways, the beginning of the story rather than the whole of it. And once you move beyond the postcard image, the region begins to reveal entirely different landscapes, entirely different rhythms, and an entirely different sense of what this place actually is. The hills above the coast. Most visitors spend their time looking out toward the sea. But one of the Amalfi Coast's greatest treasures lies above it. The hills surrounding the coastline are covered with terraces built over centuries by communities who had no flat land and no other option but to carve fields into near vertical mountainsides. Lemon groves stretch across steep slopes, their fruit growing large and fragrant in a climate shaped by sea air and abundant sunshine. These landscapes helped shape the region long before tourism arrived. The lemons, the olives, the fishing. These were the foundations of life here for generations. And they continue to define local life today, even as the coastline below fills with visitors each summer. The Path of the Gods. High above the villages runs one of Italy's most spectacular walking trails, the Path of the Gods. The name was not given casually. The route follows ancient pathways that connected isolated mountain communities long before roads existed along the coast below. These were paths walked by farmers, fishermen, and pilgrims for whom the mountains were not scenic backdrops but daily realities. Today, the path offers views that stretch across the full length of the coastline and deep into the open Mediterranean beyond. The trail winds along ridge lines where the drop to the sea below feels both terrifying and extraordinary. Villages appear in the distance, small and impossibly positioned. And the silence up here is something visitors don't expect. From here, the Amalfi Coast feels completely different, less crowded, less polished, and far more dramatic in ways that no photograph from a hotel terrace can fully capture. Most visitors leave the Amalfi Coast thinking they've seen it. They've walked Positano's stairways, eaten seafood with a view, and watched the sun set over the Mediterranean. But the deeper you explore, the more it changes. If you enjoy discovering destinations beyond the obvious, this channel is built for that. Villages beyond the famous stops. While Positano attracts most of the attention, smaller communities continue to thrive throughout the region, largely unbothered by the volume of visitors concentrated in more famous places. Places like Atrani sit just around the headland from Amalfi town, separated by a short walk, but feeling like a world apart. It has a small piazza, a beach, old fishing boats pulled up on the shore, and almost no one in it compared to the towns nearby. Ravello climbs the mountainside above the coast, its gardens and hilltop villas offering some of the region's most sweeping views without the crowds below. And Scala, one of the oldest settlements in the area, sits quietly across the valley, its medieval architecture largely unchanged. The streets are quieter in all of these places. The pace is slower. And daily life often feels less connected to tourism and more connected to the routines that have existed here for centuries. These villages reveal an Amalfi Coast many travelers never experience. One built around local traditions rather than visitor itineraries. Food beyond the view. The Amalfi Coast is famous for its scenery. But food remains an equally important part of the experience, and in many ways it's a more honest window into the culture than any viewpoint. Fresh seafood arrives daily from the Mediterranean, prepared simply in ways that reflect generations of coastal cooking, rather than international trends. Local lemons appear in everything from desserts to limoncello to pasta dishes, where the acidity cuts through rich sauces in ways that feel perfectly calibrated to the climate. Many of the best meals aren't found at famous viewpoints. They're found in places where locals gather, where the wine comes from the hillside just above, and where no one is trying to replicate something seen in a travel magazine. The coastline from the water. One of the best ways to understand the Amalfi Coast is from the sea. From the water, the scale becomes clear in ways that standing on a cliffside viewpoint cannot fully convey. The mountains don't just slope toward the coast. They plunge into it, dropping hundreds of meters with an abruptness that feels almost geological in its drama. Villages appear suspended above towering cliffs, their buildings stacked so tightly it seems impossible that gravity allows them to remain where they are. And parts of the coastline remain inaccessible by road entirely, visible only from the water or from trails far above. It's a perspective that many visitors never experience, but one that completely changes how the region feels, shifting it from a backdrop into something with genuine depth and scale. Why travelers are looking beyond Positano. Travel habits along the Amalfi Coast are changing. Many visitors still arrive focused on Positano, drawn by images that have circulated long enough to feel like obligations rather than choices. But increasingly, travelers are exploring farther, seeking quieter villages where a conversation with a local is possible without competing with a tour group. Longer walks through landscapes that haven't been rearranged for photographs, and experiences that feel more authentic, more grounded, and more connected to the actual history of the place. The terraced farms, the mountain trails, the fishing traditions, the architecture of towns that were built for residents rather than visitors. Because the Amalfi Coast offers much more than a photograph. It offers layers waiting to be discovered by anyone willing to move at a slightly slower pace. Who this side of the Amalfi Coast is for. This side of the Amalfi Coast is for travelers who enjoy slowing down. For those who understand that some of the best experiences aren't found on the front page of a guidebook. For people who want contrast, the famous beauty, and the quieter version that exists just behind it. For travelers who don't need every moment to be curated, who are comfortable getting slightly lost, and who find more satisfaction in discovering something unexpected than in confirming something already known. Because the deeper you explore, the richer the experience becomes. The Amalfi Coast isn't just colorful villages and famous viewpoints. It's hidden trails, mountain communities, centuries-old farming traditions, and landscapes shaped by both nature and the patient labor of people who built something extraordinary on ground that gave them very little to work with. It's lemons grown on impossible hillsides, paths walked for 1,000 years, villages that existed long before anyone thought to photograph them. And once you move beyond the postcard version, you realize how much more there is. How much quieter it gets just a few steps off the main path. How much older it feels once the crowds thin out. And how much more it offers to those who take the time to look. Subscribe for more journeys beyond the tourist version. What part of the Amalfi Coast would you explore first?